It's time we talked about it. I'm getting tired of living without it. The things in my life just don't make any sense. Each day I wake in the morning, but every day just feels so boring. I don't understand just what I need to change. It's up to you to want to do the things you want to do. And though it's temporary, feeling sad can be so scary. I love the ones who understand me. I never want to feel so angry. I never want to feel like this again.
Welcome to the 603 Stories Podcast, a monthly mental health podcast made by young adults for young adults, where we share stories, make connections, and find hope. Any ads throughout this podcast are not associated with 603 Stories or the 603 Stories Podcast. There will be sensitive subjects discussed during this podcast. Should you need them, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline is 1-800-273-8255. Or you can text the crisis text line by texting 741-741.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 603 Stories. I'm your host, Jace Troy, and I'm joined today by Linds, Jakows. Today, we're going to be talking about community organizing in the LGBT community and how that relates to mental health. So before we jump in, I just want to remind everyone that myself and those affiliated with the 603 podcast story are not necessarily mental health professionals, but we will have resources available either at the beginning or the end of the podcast. So Linds, would you like to take a minute to jump in and tell us a little bit about yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Sure. My name is Linds Jakows. I use they, them pronouns. I live in Dover right now. I've been in New Hampshire for the past almost 7 years, organizing on lots of good campaigns to make good trouble. And I really love organizing people and bringing small groups of people together and growing movements to build power for queer people and all kinds of economic and social justice. So I didn't know I was going to end up in New Hampshire when I first started thinking about politics and organizing, but I really love the community that I've built out here.
Wonderful. I love that you say getting into good trouble. So what inspired you to get involved with advocacy in the first place?
So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona, the first 18 years of my life through high school, and discovered that I was queer when I was 15. Pretty typical story. I kissed my best friend and had a light bulb go off, and pretty, quickly came to terms with that myself. I didn't, have a big struggle internally with it, but I knew that it was definitely not something that would fit with my dad's conservative Catholicism. And so I didn't plan on coming out to him until much later when I was older and in a serious relationship. But he did find out when I was 16. And he told me that I had to go to a conservative Christian school if I wanted to go out of state for college, hoping that would straighten me out, which wasn't the case at all. So I ended up going to Pepperdine University, which is associated with the Church of Christ, where we weren't allowed to have even an LGBTQ student group on campus.
Oh, wow.
So I started organizing sort of accidentally just to get one recognized. And I didn't really know what I was doing was organizing, just gathering, me and my queer friends and support other supportive students to meet in library classrooms, people's dorms. We spent a really long time trying to hash out a club constitution and a proposal for the administration that we thought would, be very, well worded and I am realizing now that we should have just submitted anything and we were going to get denied no matter what. And the real work came after that, pushing a petition that got like 10,000 signatures. We reached out to a lot of local media in the LA area, got everything from The Advocate to LA Weekly to cover our denial of our student-run group. And it really grew from there, including alumni calling in and saying they were going to boycott donations. And on one hand, that was, a really personal identity issue for me, wanting a group where, I could freely be myself and talk about the things that mattered to me. But on a bigger level, it was also about a small group of administrators and the Board of Regents, top donors, silencing everyone else on campus, especially LGBTQ students. And so it really made me look at that bigger picture and realize that that's the case on a lot of issues, a small group of people at the top silencing everyone else. And so I knew that I wanted to work with students on a bunch of other issues to make sure that their voices were heard. And I went on to run student voter registration drives and other campaigns after graduating.
Wow. So it sounds like this really started as kind of like a passion project for you, like something that you needed for yourself. And in the meantime, you kind of found everyone else along the way that like also needed it. And that's really cool. It's like you attract what you need at the moment. So I'm just wondering, what do you do now? What's your title, and how have you turned this passion project into a career?
Yeah, so I've worked on a lot of different campaigns moving across the country as I went. I worked with students in Western Mass around environmental issues on college campuses. I moved to New Hampshire to take a job working to get big money out of politics. I'm really proud of having managed the campaign that won transgender non-discrimination protections in 2018, updated our state's anti-discrimination law to include trans people in workplaces, housing, and public spaces. And currently, I am an organizer with the One Fair Wage campaign, which is advocating for $15 an hour minimum wage with tips on top for tipped workers. I started off doing just some part-time field organizing here, and recently moved up to full-time, and I'm helping out other states doing digital organizing there as well. So, as someone, I haven't worked in the service industry myself, but I've worked low-wage retail jobs, especially, as I was going through Pepperdine, making just above minimum wage in a really expensive place to live for college. And I know a lot of folks in the service industry, especially now, who are really struggling. So I believe everyone deserves at least $15 an hour, and working to get some of those stories to connect with our senators to do the right thing when that comes up for a vote this summer.
Wonderful. And how do you see mental health playing a part in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely struggled with my own mental health, and feeling just really alone at first at Pepperdine, and not having that support system, and not, finding my niche and people that I felt safe around at first was really hard. And I didn't necessarily know, how to get past that. And there have been other times with organizing, like when I first moved to Western Mass, I was working for an organization that paid people like $24,000 a year to work like 80-hour weeks, and I couldn't afford a car at the time. So I was really struggling, having to take multiple buses to all of the campuses that I was at, and just working nonstop around the clock. And I felt like I was too busy to realize how depressed I was at the time, and, just struggling to go through the motions like that. So I've definitely realized that I've needed to take some breaks in between campaigns, and um, take other jobs that are maybe not as focused on like the big long-term social change, but are a little bit slower pace and give me a little bit more balance. So yeah, but it's definitely been a process. And, I realized I was non-binary when I was in Western Mass, and then quickly moved to New Hampshire where I didn't know anybody. And that non-binary was something that was much less easily understood. And I, again, like didn't really have that support network, but I started going to therapy. I started going to a group therapy for trans and non-binary people that started to really grow, and got on medication eventually for anxiety and depression. And yeah, I think it's definitely been a journey, but I think that, it's given me more focus and, the kind of like work-life balance that I need, and, what kind of community can help support me too.
Seriously, work-life balance is so, so important. And I'm glad that you're finding ways to maintain your mental stability through all of this social change that you're doing for others. It's good to make sure that you're taking care of yourself as well. So where do you see policy and mental health intersecting in your life? Would you like to go into any of the bills that you've worked on recently?
Sure. So one of the bills that I worked on earlier this year was a bill that would ban transgender girls and women at the high school and college level from participating in any athletics on women's and girls' teams. Which is not a standalone bill that's just in New Hampshire. Our opposition has introduced bills like that in many states all across the country, and many of them specifically target trans girls and women. With
I was going to say, it's interesting that it's not targeting trans men as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Some of them do, but in New Hampshire, yeah, it was just trans girls and women. And I really encourage anybody who, um, who is not trans themselves and haven't really thought about the issue. There's a really great documentary called Changing the Game that just came to Hulu, that follows 3 young athletes in high school. There's 1 trans man and 2 trans girls who are competing, and it also features some fun little cameos from the Freedom New Hampshire campaign. It follows Sarah Huckman, who was on her cross country ski team in high school, and she's from New Hampshire and was really active in the non-discrimination campaign. And so there's a couple of shots that, focus on some of our press conferences. And yeah, I'm there kicking off a press conference in the documentary, and there's lots of other really strong advocates from New Hampshire that make some little cameos in the film. So we did a screening of that through Red River Theater when that bill was making its way through the legislature this spring, and 200 people came out to view that virtually, and then watched a panel that was moderated by myself with Chris Mosier, who was, I believe, the first transgender athlete to qualify for the Olympic trials, who executive produced the film, and Anne Lieberman from an organization called Athlete Ally, that works on LGBTQ inclusivity in sports, and then Sarah and Emmett, who are New Hampshire folks who have competed here in high school and college. So it was really great to have a Q&A with some local people and make the case for ending that bill once and for all in New Hampshire.
Wonderful. So could you also tell us just a little bit about HB 5444, which is the Divisive Concepts Bill?
Sure. Before I get to that, though, I do want to let people know that the Trans Youth in Sports Bill proposed ban was retained by the committee. And so they will have some kind of study session this summer to bring it back up again. And they will still need to hear from people that they need to solidly kill that bill once and for all. So the best way to stay in touch with that effort is to go to transactionnh.org. Might be .com, but I'm pretty sure it's .org. Transactionnh, and sign up for the email list there, and that'll keep you updated about opportunities to call the senators on that committee when they bring that bill up again this summer. It's not, fully dead yet.
That's wonderful information to have. Thank you so much.
Sure. You asked about the Divisive Concepts Bill. So unfortunately, I'm sure other people have spoken about this, but it's in our state budget right now, language banning any conversation or teaching about systemic racism, sexism, other isms, of course, in state contracts, grants, and training programs. So not just like public schools, but any kind of program or organization that gets state funding.
And just to give a little background and history for our listeners, the Divisive Concepts Bill is a bill that defines and prohibits the dissemination of certain divisive concepts related to sex and race in state contracts, grants, and training programs. And so I guess off of that, I just want to ask, have you ever been discouraged in your organizing? Because bills like this that aren't passing or that are being shot down, it can feel like a real blow to the community. And I just wanted to know how organizers handle that.
Yeah, it can be really tough. I feel like I've been discouraged on just about every campaign that I've worked on at some point. So yeah, it can sometimes feel like you're just hitting your head against the wall if you talk to 100 people and only a handful of them get it. But the one thing that I, try to come back to is, there's always people that are not going to agree with you, and you want to spend the most time with the people that do and equipping them with, the tools that they need to take action and, building their confidence and helping them build their communities that are going to support them through that process. And so those are the moments that give me hope and that I try to come back to when I've gotten a lot of rejection, whether it's from regular people that I'm trying to organize or legislators that just don't get it and are frustrating.
So how do you take care of your team in that moment? What are some things that you do to kind of keep the energy positive and keep everyone passionate about the work that they do?
Yeah, I think it's important to have social spaces where you're not just, focusing on the organizing project, but, you're getting to know people as people and, what's important to them and what they have going on in their lives outside of organizing, and, to just check in and provide a lot of spaces where you're asking people for feedback, like how did that go? Like, what ideas do you have for, making the next event go better? And not always, sometimes I feel like, I always have to come up with the answer, like what comes next, but often others have, ideas that I never would have thought of in my own little bubble too. So I think just creating a space where everybody's voices can be heard and people feel really actively listened to.
Next up, I want to ask how you take care of yourself in the midst of taking care of others, because this can be a very draining job for sure, especially when it feels like you're fighting for something that you're passionate about. So how do you prioritize self-care?
Yeah, it's definitely a process. I don't pretend to like have the perfect answer, the perfect, thing to pass along to people, but um I've learned a lot from a book by Adrienne Marie Brown called Pleasure Activism that is really about like, getting past as to all of the sort of grunt work and the obligation and that can weigh us down in organizing and really centering pleasure and joy and the things that like make us feel whole and connected to people, and knowing that that will help the rest of the work go um, the way that it's supposed to go, and make people feel whole and empowered and good in the process of being our whole selves, and also being in these movements. So yeah, I definitely find a lot of my friends are also organizers, and sometimes that can be good to have space to talk about that in a way that other people understand, but I'm also trying to be mindful of boundaries, and sometimes it can be like all we talk about is work, and don't make that time to have spaces where we don't talk about organizing and work as much. But through especially the Freedom New Hampshire campaign, just hearing like from people that I only knew a little bit or didn't know at all, who reached out and said, I have a grandchild or a child who's trans, and this work is so meaningful and is giving them so much hope. That really lifts me up in this work. And in that campaign, I especially felt really supported and listened to by the national folks that were supporting the campaign, which isn't always the case. Sometimes national organizations have agendas and don't, listen closely to what works on the local level as well.
For sure. How has being part of a community that does work around LGBTQ plus issues improved your mental health or changed your outlook on policy?
I got a lot more confidence from, part of the non-discrimination campaign requiring me to regularly say, hello, I'm Linds, I'm non-binary, I use they, them pronouns. And I got a lot more comfortable with that, having to do that all day, every day. So that definitely like built my confidence on a personal level. It was also really cool to see people that didn't have that support community, start to build that through our events and action days, and especially people that had experienced a lot of discrimination, or maybe lost a child to suicide, or other really tough situations. I also found a lot of of strength through the Slam for Your Die poetry community in Manchester, and going there and writing some really personal poems about gender and queerness, and seeing that reflected back at me, and meeting a lot of poets through that community that expressed being non-binary in a whole bunch of different ways. And that really made me so much more comfortable with the fact that non-binary doesn't have to look one way, and it can look a million ways. And
Yes.
yeah, that definitely improved my mental health, and, not feeling like I was the only one, and, not doing it right.
This is why community is so important. They always wrap around you when you need them, right?
Yeah.
And lastly, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing to make things better for the LGBTQ plus community, what would it be?
I think there absolutely needs to be more services that help people when they're experiencing discrimination. We passed this law in 2018 that on the books outlawed discrimination based on gender identity, but of course that is still happening. And of course, a lot of people don't have the time or money or mental ability to sue an employer or a landlord or whoever else might discriminate against them. And I'm still hearing so many people come to me and say, I don't know what to do. And sometimes I try to direct them to something like New Hampshire Legal Aid, but not everybody is even, up for working with a free lawyer like that. So if I could wave a magic wand, I would create some entity that would be able to help and support people through that process, including helping them find, free or close to free housing in the meantime, or, help place them with a trans-friendly employer, whatever else they need while they're figuring that out. Mental health support, I think, is something that's also really lacking, especially, with, people who are in real emergency situations getting beds. And so I think there needs to be a lot more strong resources for people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Linds, for taking the time today to talk with us about your own personal story and also the work that you've been doing on these bills.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to hear this podcast, and I hope that people can connect through these stories. So really glad you're doing this work.
Thank you. And just to reiterate on a few things that you said before we go, so that people have time to write it down if they want. House Bill 198, the Trans Youth and Sports Bill, has been retained for the summer. And one way that you can get involved is to go to transactionnewhampshire.org, sign up for the email, and they'll send you emails to find out how you can help in further ways. And also, if you have time, check out the documentary on Hulu, Changing the Game. Thank you so much, Linds.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the 603 Stories Podcast, a monthly podcast made by young adults for young adults. You can check out 603 Stories on Facebook or Instagram, or at our website, 603stories.org. Just a reminder, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline can be reached at 800-273-8255. That's 800-273-TALK. And the crisis text line can be reached by texting to 741-741. Remember, you can make connections, get help, and find hope through 603 Stories.